Welcome back to the Mina Show featuring Lenny, the only NFL podcast where one of the host's favorite trick play is rolling over, then playing dead. That's Lenny. I'm Mina Kimes. That generous laugh you just heard was from a repeat guest. He was last year to talk about the AFC South. Much has changed since then. The biggest thing being that the team that he covers, the Houston Texans, went from being sort of a scrappy underdog, let's see what we got in the rookie quarterback, to a legitimate Super Bowl contender. DJ Bien-Aime, what is it like in Houston right now, going into a season where expectations are so unbelievably high for this football team?
Yeah, again, last year it was, can CJ just be good, right? Because people had questions. How could he handle pressure? What was his creativity like outside of the pocket, things of that nature? And a year later, now Texans fans, I have a friend I went to college with that's a big Texans fan I play football with. He believes that the Texans are going to get to the AFC Championship game minimum, right?
Minimum.
Minimum. Like CJ has created that type of buzz where everybody around the building and within the fan base feel like they are a legitimate Super Bowl team. So yeah, that's where we are right now. And compared to last year, where it was like, hey, just CJ, just be good, and we'll go from there. But now it's CJ was so good to where it's like, imagine what he'll be in year 2, 3, and 4.
You were optimistic. I do remember that from when we spoke. You were pretty impressed by what you had seen thus far, because we did this. We talked. I think the AFC South was maybe one of the last divisions I covered last season, partly because I wanted to get, there were 2 rookie quarterbacks obviously in the division, so I thought it would be useful to kind of wait until we'd seen them play in the preseason. Funny thing was, I think it was the first preseason game, CJ actually struggled, if I remember correctly.
He looked bad.
Yeah. Which is a reminder that the preseason is something you should take with a grain of salt, as I suppose the entire offseason is when it applies to these young players, these young quarterbacks in particular, because, of course, he then went on to light the world on fire, shatter records, win Rookie of the Year. Let's start with the Houston Texans. We are going to cover all 4 teams. You were optimistic about some of the teams, too. You're very unbiased, so and you've obviously seen these teams up close and personal, so I am excited to get to them. But I am, of course, excited, like everyone else, to talk about the Houston Texans. Let's start with the offense, because this was an offense that was incredibly productive last season through the air, incredibly unproductive on the ground. You go out, which, by the way, again, makes the CJ performance all the more incredible. Frankly, the fact that he was saddled with, to my eye, and by most metrics, one of the worst rushing attacks in football. You go out, you add Stephon Diggs. Tank Dell was injured last season. Should be back at some point. This was the most injured offensive line in football, according to Football Outsiders, which again is another thing that makes CJ's performance so impressive. So let's start here. The run game was really the biggest weakness on the team. Do you think it will be better this season? And if so, why?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest reasons for me is having talked to guys, especially on the offensive line. One thing they mentioned was how everybody has to be on the same page when it comes to just some of the run game scheme. And if you're just a touch off, that's going to cause a bunch of plays to get blown up. And we saw that consistently. And one thing is the center has responsibility in identifying the mic, and he was also a rookie. I think both of them were, actually, because it was Jerry Patterson, rookie, Drew Scruggs, rookie. And if they're off, that can mess up the entire offensive line. So I think another year in that scheme is going to give. And again, they didn't have continuity. That was one of their biggest issues too. Yeah. They didn't have that much continuity. And with them, they, offensive line play, everybody has to be on one accord. Because if one guy misses a block or one guy blocks the wrong guy, you might have 2 guys blocking the wrong person. Now you have one person either coming through the B gap or coming through the C gap or coming through the A gap, whatever that looks like. So I think it'll be better because there's no way they could be as injured as they was last year. Like, that was something I have never seen in my life, right? Where Shaq Mason was the only one that was healthy the entire season. And I think they should have way better injury luck. I think putting Titus back at right tackle where he's more natural at, along with Drew Scruggs at left. Well, we'll see who's at left guard. It could be Drew Scruggs. It could be Kenyon Green. But Kenyon Green looks good. Like, Kenyon Green looks like he realized hey, I'm a professional athlete. I have to treat my body like I'm a professional athlete, and I can't
Mm.
just rely on pure talent. And obviously, they have Laramie anchoring the entire offensive line, who I think is at the worst the second best left tackle in the league. So
Yeah.
I think it should be better. And then you're gonna have Joe Mixon, who they
Oh, I should have
traded for.
mentioned, by the way. Yeah, Joe Mixon.
Right,
I mean,
right,
I guess okay. So I talked about Diggs, who I'm going to get to next, because the wide receiver group is pretty special and really interesting. But the Mixon edition it made sense. It's not like they gave up a ton to get him, of course.
right.
I do think he is something of a declining player,
Me
though.
too.
So I wasn't, yeah, like so I don't. I think what you just said, everything about the offensive line and all the issues they had last year, to me, that's much more meaningful when we talk about this run game being better. I don't think, in fact, Devin Singletary is. I still think he's like a pretty good player. When I was watching,
Me
it didn't
too.
seem to me like he was the problem so much as it was the blocking.
Yeah, yeah, completely agree there. And that's why, even though they did get Joe Mixon, that extension, I kind of agree with you in the sense of like, I don't know if you needed to do that, right? Like, but if the offensive line is playing well and they're in unison, then I think the rushing attack, because they don't need like a top 10 rushing attack, right? They just
Right.
need one that
Well,
is effective, right? Clearly with CJ. And back to like just the getting on the same page of Corey. Um, with the offensive line, I remember Miami year one under Mike McDaniel, because again, Mike McDaniel, Bobby Slow, they basically run the same scheme outside of different tweaks that they have. Miami's offensive line and the run game struggled year one, and then year two they were a top 10 unit. I could
yeah.
see not necessarily the same impact in year two with this offensive line, but something close where like they're a top 15-ish offensive line in terms of
So
run blocking.
you mentioned Bobby Slowik, who is their offensive coordinator. He was a first-time offensive coordinator last year. Um, he got some head coaching looks this
Hmm.
offseason off of the success of this offense last year.
Right.
What impressed you about what he did last season with this offense, and where do you think he can get better this year?
Yeah, so what really impressed me with Bobby Slowik was one, he set up CJ for success early, right? Because I remember talking to a front office guy, and he said the reason why he thinks CJ is going to have so much success is because he had success early. And a lot of this, especially when it comes to athletes, it's confidence. And if you have confidence, then you'll be able to play at a much higher level. Like I remember when I was running track, my best meets is when I was at my most confident. When I was shaky on confidence, that's when I got blowed out. So the fact that he was able to set him up to have success and have confidence, he was able to carry that because CJ is big when it comes to confidence, big with swagger, things of that nature. So what impressed me the most was they had a rut after the Steelers game when they went to 2-2. They had a rut where they really struggled against the Falcons, Panthers, Saints, and that was because teams realized, hey, Bobby Slowik and CJ on third down, they love throwing over the middle of the field, whether it's hitting those digs,
That's right.
whatever it is, they love throwing over the middle of the field. Let's run a bunch of cover fours with some quarters. Let's run some cover one, and let's flood the entire middle. And they struggled for a few weeks, and then whatever it was, they found our way how to get out of that rut because that was the only thing that really gave them issues outside of Mike McDonald with the Ravens. Like he's obviously next level when it comes to confusing quarterbacks and defenses and offensive coordinators. But beyond that, once they got through that three game stretch, it was smooth sailing. It was smooth sailing. So that's probably what impressed me the most. And I think honestly, like his commitment to the run game to set up CJ for more success. Because CJ was one of the best quarterbacks in the league on first and second downs. So like if you got him into like that manageable second down
Yeah.
range, you had the entire field to work with at that point. You could, and he really was big on trying to keep CJ out of third and sevens and longer. Not saying that CJ wasn't good in those moments because he had moments, but the success rate on third and seven or longer was like 30%. To be fair, the league average is 32 in terms of success rate, but again, below average, right? So that's why I was really impressed with his commitment to the run game, even when it wasn't working, because he had a plan down the line.
So it didn't bother you because that was actually in my follow up. Like sometimes it felt like he committed a little too hard to the run. Because not because of any hard and fast rules about running on early downs that I have necessarily, but because they stunk at it a
Yeah,
lot of the
yeah,
time.
yeah.
So at times, it was a little bit. I really liked the pass game and the way that they used motion to set up their
Mhm,
receivers. I thought was really
mhm,
smart. The way he put CJ on the move at times, all of that.
mhm.
And I thought he got the most out of the receivers too. I thought he was so good at identifying, and we're gonna get those receivers, their skill sets, and
Yeah.
putting them in a position to succeed, and the combinations as well. But uh, I also felt like CJ, I don't want to say he bailed him out at times or bailed out
Oh,
the
he
offense
did.
on third down, but I was like, dang, like you're kind of running it, you're kind of slamming your head into a wall here with some of these runs because maybe you come from San Francisco, which is obviously one of the best rushing teams in the NFL. It ain't San Francisco anymore, right? Because you're
Right,
getting absolutely
right,
nothing on the ground, in addition to like
right.
a surprisingly mediocre play action passing attack.
Yeah, yeah. So I think those are some aspects where he can get a little bit better is at okay, knowing when to kind of, bail a little bit or flip the script in that sense. I think that's where he can get better at. Um, Also, I think that they were roughly a bottom tier team on third downs. I think he can get better there in terms of calling the plays that can convert those. Obviously, that some of that relies on CJ. But back to what you said, there were a lot of times where CJ was bailing out Bobby. I think the Jags game in Houston was a great example of that because there were so many plays where CJ would say hut and wherever the play was designed was completely muddied up and he had to create a lot to just try to make something happen. I think he finished over 300 passing yards that game and I think he might have had 3 total touchdowns. But I think that was one of those games. I remember interviewing him, I think that week or maybe a couple weeks later, and I think he kind of pinpointed how there's a lot of times when CJ bails me out of
Mm,
stupid play calls. So um, that's one of those weeks that kind of speaks to what you were talking about. And I think
mm,
once they got later into the season, they played the Ravens, who had an elite defense, an elite defensive mind. Those mistakes that Bobby would have at times wasn't going to be sustainable against that
mm.
defense.
Um, so I mentioned the receivers who Texans fans, or really it was more like Ohio State fans who got mad at me once because I put out a tweet where I was basically trying to praise Dell and Collins. I said, Stroud's been amazing, but it's not like he's playing with scrubs.
Right,
I think Collins and Dell are really fantastic. Dalton Schultz a good tight
right.
end, and they were like, "Why are you saying CJ Stroud is not elevating the talent?" I'm like, "No, literally, I literally wrote he's amazing." But my point was actually, I think these players are actually are just really good on their own merits. Now you throw Stephon Diggs into that equation, and you're looking at one of the top 5 to 10 pass catching groups in the entire NFL. How do you see these receivers fitting together? Like, what do you see? Because Collins and Diggs, very different players. I
Hmm.
think it would be kind of a mistake to just say he's the number one, he's this, right? But how do you like? How do you see Diggs adding to the passing attack, and how do you see him? What sort of ways can he help take them to the next level that maybe they weren't quite as good last year as what you expect this season?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say I still think Nico's going to be the one. One, they just paid him, and they paid him a lot. And I also think
Deservedly.
that deservedly, yeah, he was one of the best receivers in the league last year. He just doesn't get the recognition. But I think what Diz can add is kind of be that underneath threat that they were kind of missing last year, like a guy that you put him in a slot, he can consistently win down after down after down, where you have to give a lot of attention to. Last year was basically because even though Tank is a small player in terms of size, he played mainly on the outside. Like that's where he got
Yeah.
busy. And the same with Nico. Like they were kind of missing that. I think they were hoping that Robert Woods could be that. But
Mhm.
Robert Woods injuries, things piled up. It is what it is. Like he's not the player that he once was. So you added Diggs because a lot of camp, well, not camp, but mini camp and OTAs, we saw him in the slot being moved around or motioned into the slot too, so he could get mismatches. So I can see a scenario where you have a receiver that obviously gonna play on the outside, but can kind of be that chess piece for Bobby Slowik to keep defenses off balance. But I still think Nico's gonna be the one. But I don't think it's gonna be a situation where it's like Nico got like 15 or 16 or 1700 yards. Stephon got like 13. Tank got like 11. No, I don't see it like that because Bobby wants to run the ball, obviously. And I think it's just really gonna come on a week by week basis with still Nico being the featured receiver in the game plan consistently. Not saying Diggs won't be, but I still think based on what Nico did last year, I don't see a scenario. He was good in every single situation. Press
He really
coverage,
was.
single coverage, isolate. It didn't matter what it was. It didn't matter what the route was. He was phenomenal. I think the Colts game was when I was like, wow. Like he even surprised some of his own team. I had some of his teammates tell me, I knew he was good, but I didn't know he had that. Because that
Yeah.
Colts game, he basically, kind of carried the offense for a lot of majority of that game. So, and he was the only receiver too. My bad. Go ahead.
I think Nico Collins, has the qualities to be like a top 10 receiver in the NFL.
Agreed.
Just the size, the speed, the spatial awareness, physicality, yards after the catch, hands. You talked about how he was so good against press. He was so good in a variety of situations. But one thing that jumps out to me, and I think about this to kind of go back to Diggs, and I love what you said about him in the slot. I'll get to that in a second. But Nico was unbelievable versus zone coverage last
Mm-hmm.
year. The Texans offense was incredibly good against zone coverage, but he had
Right.
337 yards over expected, which is the NGS stat where it's like what
Right.
an average receiver would get basically based on the situation. No other receiver in the NFL had over 300 and only
Mm,
6 had over 200 and he had
mm,
337. Now,
right.
the Texans were amazing against zone. They were less so against man. And that's where I think Diggs comes into the equation, that route running ability that he can get so open so quickly underneath. I love the idea of him in the slot sometimes because I think, DJ, that the Texans are going to face a lot of too high this year with that
Yeah.
receiving group. And
Yep.
having that wide receiver who can work the middle of the field, kind of like Tyler Boyd in Cincinnati, for example. Very different
Mm-hmm.
player. But my point is like having that
Right.
other option is so important when defenses start to play you that way. And I really think Diggs can play that role for the Texans. Um, it to me, like it just presents so many problems for opposing defenses.
Yeah, like completely agree, right? Like while Diggs might not have the elite vertical presence that he once had, but his intermediate, his shiftiness, it's still. I went back and watched all the games where he didn't go for over 100 yards. That's the one talking point. But
Yeah,
his lateral movement is still there. His suddenness.
agree.
I remember like going to like the first time we got to see him. I remember texting some of my friends, and I was like, oh, okay. The meme of like when Phantom pulls up the 300 Chrysler. I was like, oh, that's what that looks like. When it came to the route running. And it's not like I don't think Tank Dell or Nico or Robert Woods, Noah Brown, or all those guys don't have good route runners. They are, but Diggs, it's like,
Technician. He's a technician.
yeah, yeah. So he's gonna, that trio is gonna cause a lot of problems because it's like, what are you gonna do? How are you gonna game plan? You can't necessarily double. If you want to double some, okay, cool. You're gonna leave Nico and Tank 1-on-1, or you're gonna leave Stephon and Tank 1-on-1. You're gonna leave Nico and you're gonna just leave Nico and Tank 1-on-1 or whatever. So like, it's gonna be interesting to watch. I'm really curious to see how it all come together though. 'Cause I think it all is gonna fall on Bobby to design the offense in that aspect.
Well, let me ask you one more question about the offense before we move on. Again, CJ Stroud. I don't want to like sound like we're skipping over how unreal he was last year. I mean,
Right.
he was good at everything pretty much. He was
Literally.
amazing and on third down and coming from behind, losing like just putting the team on his back. Accurate, aggressive. That combination of accurate and aggressive is really
Right.
special. What is if you had to pick one thing, like if this time next year we're not talking about the Texans winning the division, other than obviously injuries to him or any of the key players, what do you think it would be with Stroud in this offense that, like, if you had to identify like one potential pitfall? Because the vibes are so positive around this unit,
Right.
it's almost
Right.
hard to figure out what could go wrong.
Yeah, I would say probably play calling. I think that's one possibility where you're not being efficient throughout the game consistently. You're just not being efficient. Like there's too many clunks. Cause we've seen it before where like teams get all this talent on offense and it's just it's Like we know what the ceiling can be, but it have its moments where it's just not there. That's what I would say in that regard. It's kind of, obviously I think CJ's better than Derek Carr, but it's kind of similar to like when the Raiders had Derek Carr, they had Devontae Adams, Darren Waller, Hunter Renfrow, right? Like we had all these pieces and it just didn't come together, it just didn't mesh. Granted, a little different, right? But again, like I could see play calling being like the biggest issue in holding this offense back in that aspect. Not saying like Bobby can't call plays, but it's a lot different when you have a receiver that you gotta feature. Because if you don't
Yeah.
feature, he will let you know about it, right? And you have Nico who just got
Diggs?
paid.
What?
And you got Nico who just got paid, who,
That's right.
wants the ball too. And then you have Tank Dell who was on pace for 1,200 yards. And he thinks he's
It's a
a
lot of
top
mouths.
tier. It's a lot of mouths for you. You got Dalton Schultz. You got to pay Joe Mixon too, right? Joe Mixon just got paid, so there's a lot of you're gonna have to manage a lot of the egos. That's
See,
gonna
that's
be
the
there.
one where if they feed Mixon too much, that's what would potentially. I mean, not to continue harping on that, but it really was the central frustration I had at times. The defense on the flip side is a little bit different, so I'm going to take a second to kind of go over the personnel because the offense is, you had Diggs and Mixon largely the same. Opposite Will Anderson Jr., Jonathan Grenard's out. Danielle Hunter is in. Danico
Hmm.
Autry, who's like everybody's favorite, like hipster football player,
Right.
is there. At linebacker, like Cashman left. D'Amico Ryans brings back old friend Aziz Al-Shaair to be paired with Christian Harris. And then in the secondary, a little bit similar here. You did draft Kwame Lassiter as a corner. We'll see who starts opposite Derek Stingley. We can get to that. Jimmy Ward's hopefully healthy, but you're returning the same safeties. So let me ask you this to start this off. This was a defense that did play a lot better last year. Ended up finishing the season 11th in EPA play, 9th in success rate. A lot of their success, however, holistically was because they were unreal versus the run. One of the 2 or 3 best run defenses in football.
Hmm.
Less
Hmm.
successful versus the pass. That's where the numbers look a
Right.
little bit less good. 23rd in DVOA.
Right.
Why? Why was this? Because they had a lot of good players. Stingley was amazing last year. Obviously, Anderson Jr. and Grenard were fantastic. The linebackers played well. Why did this defense struggle at times against the pass last year? And then why might they be better this season?
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest reasons why they struggle against pass. I don't want to, overly criticize D'Amico, but there were times where he would like get get out schemed on some passing plays, right? Like there was like a streak where teams would open up the game with a play action down the field because they knew that D'Amico was going to be in some type of quarters look where and have one of the safeties bite down on a play action, and you're going to have your speedster most likely against Steven Nelson down the middle of the field, or sometimes maybe it wasn't D'Amico, but the secondary not being all on one accord in terms of a communication standpoint. Um, and you have blown coverages, right? Like I remember, like I'm gonna be honest, they should have lost the Broncos game because there were so many plays where Russ just missed wide open guys, and it's not even like miss in terms of he missed a throw, he just completely missed. But there were so many breakdowns because teams kind of knew D'Amico's tendency on early downs. Third downs is when it got a little tricky for offenses because D'Amico gets really creative on his third down packages. I think that's why they had like a top 10 third down defense. But on first and second downs, you could have relative success because he's pretty bland on first and second downs. He's kind of holding his cards till third down. It's kind of similar with Robert Saleh. Again, he worked on him. So I would say that was one of the bigger issues was the fact that teams kind of knew what they were going to be in, so they could scheme up stuff on early downs. But on third downs, that's where they were able to get right and have some confusion. So
Yeah, well, you hit on a couple things there that I think do explain a lot of the struggles. They were terrible against play action, terrible, and that's
yeah.
early downs, obviously, when there's the threat of the run and the pass. And it was a problem that really plagued them throughout the season. Brown's game
Hmm.
comes to mind, although, yeah, obviously, tighten things up in the playoffs. But yeah, I think to me, like some of the personnel additions I think will help in that regard. I think Azeez Al-Shaair is a huge signing when we
Right.
talk about pass defense on those early downs. And then some of it is just playing together. It's year
Hmm.
one. Stingley hadn't been healthy before, incorporating a lot of new players in the back. And I think having that continuity, hopefully you'll get better play out of Jalen Petrie, who I thought took a real
Right.
step back
Right.
from
Right. Agreed.
flashing early in his career. And then the biggest thing that'll help in my mind, DJ, is pass rush has the
Right.
potential to slap. I
Yeah.
mean, what do you like? What is the early verdict on the Will Anderson Jr. Danielle Hunter combination? Do you view
Mm.
Hunter as an upgrade? Because Grenard is a really good player
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, do you
That.
do you think they see Hunter as an obviously they do, or they wouldn't have signed him as an
Yeah.
upgrade, and
Right.
why?
Right. 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 Yeah. I think they view Hunter as an elite player versus they view Gennard as a good player. So I think they kind of credited fair or not, right? And that was one of Gennard's gripes at times was he felt like he wasn't getting the credit that he deserved. Um, and I agree with him, right? Because like it was always being attributed to other stuff, right? Whether it was like the D tackles, even though like Malik Collins, Sheldon Rankins, they did create a lot of havoc on the interior, which made the rush lanes a lot easier
Sure.
for Will and Gennard to get to the quarterback. Um, but they view Hunter in a complete different class to where like he doesn't need as much help to get to the quarterback. And obviously they're super, super, super high on Will Anderson. Like they thought he was one of the best run defenders in the league as a rookie. Um, so I think it's just a combination of those things, and I think that those two could cause hell for quarterbacks if, big if, the D tackle play is up to snuff. Because I think
Mm,
losing Sheldon Rankins and Malik Collins is big, right? Like those two to me, they caused a lot of havoc, and they kind of assisted a lot with Will and
yeah.
Jonathan Gennard when it came to getting sacks. So I'm really curious to see what that looks like this season. Just having talked to people in the building, knowing that they value D tackle. They try to get Malik back, not Malik back. They try to get Sheldon back, and they tried to trade Malik for Eric Armstead, who's now with the Jacksonville Jaguars. But they wanted to upgrade that D tackle
Mm.
room, and they know how important it is for their edges. So we'll see. But I do think that if it comes together, it could be lethal.
So, final question. I kind of brushed over this.
Hmm.
Who is playing? Who do you think is starting at corner opposite Stingley?
Oh, I think it's the kid out of Georgia. Easy.
Lassiter's
Uh,
gonna. You think Lassiter will
Oh
start?
yeah, yeah. He has. It's a big gap between him and the next person. Like he was running with the
Really?
ones in OTAs and minicamp. Yeah, like
Wow.
he got all the first team reps during minicamp. Minicamp is
He.
basically like the de facto training camp practice.
I regretted not talking about him, by the way, more ahead of the draft because I loved his tape, and he is one of those classic draft prospects where like the tape is so much better than the measurables. Right? He didn't
Right,
have a
right,
good.
right,
The athletic measurables aren't there, but then when you watch him, he he can play.
right, right.
What do you think it is about his skill set that the Texans were drawn to, and why do you think he's starting immediately?
One, I think he has really good feel when it comes to route concepts, and even though he didn't run a good 40, he still trusts his speed vertically, and he can hang vertically. So he's able to get in and out of his breaks pretty fluidly um, because he's not necessarily too worried about guys running by him. So that makes his transition to break on routes a lot easier. I remember during I think it was the second day of minicamp, there were two plays where Stephon Diggs was being guarded by Lassiter, and he was able to force two PBUs. It was one where it was a stop route where he was able to break the ball up, and then another one was it wasn't PBU, but it was incompletion was on a vertical route, and he was able to run stride for stride with Diggs. So I think it's him and like CJ Henderson and Jeff Okuda. They're kind of fighting to be the third corner.
Yeah.
In all honesty,
Hmm. Yeah, I guess I'll answer the question I posed to you about the offense to wrap here. Like, what would be the thing that is why this doesn't end up being a top 10 defense? I had them in my top 10 defenses. To me, it would just be the secondary.
yeah.
I really like this front. I really love the Alshier addition. Also, D'Amico Ryan's linebackers. I'm not going to bet against that. But it's last year's a rookie, nickel, safety. there's questions there. I think
Yeah.
Petrie can get back to being the impactful player that he was, but and I really love what I saw from Stingley Jr. I've talked about this a lot last year, but I don't think this is one of the stronger secondaries in the NFL.
Yeah, that would probably because this year they're facing a lot of really good quarterbacks because they have a
Yeah.
first place schedule. So like if you're not on your game, those quarterbacks will be able to tear you up. So I think that's probably going to be their biggest question mark. That's one of my biggest question mark. That's why I don't necessarily think it's a runaway that they're going to win the division because I have questions
Ooh.
about their D tackle position. Because again, like if you can have success running the ball against up the middle, and again outside the zone, things of that nature, getting some manageable second, third downs. Now your receivers can win against that secondary. The only DB that I fully trust and have a lot of confidence in is Derek Stingley, right? Because Derek Stingley had a hawk rate of like 36 or 32% or something like that. Some insane number,
Yeah.
right? But that's the only guy that I trust. So, you know, if Jalen Petrie can get his eyes back right and get his confidence back, then I think you'll be able to see a lot of the play that you saw in year one. And I
Mm.
think that was his biggest thing. Like once his confidence started to wane a little bit, that's when you started seeing him out of position a lot because he's just trying to make plays to make up for the fact that his eyes aren't necessarily where they need to be. But he has all the time in the world. But even then, like even if Jalen Petrie gets back right, it's still like you got a rookie on the other side. You got Desmond King in the nickel. You got Jimmy Ward, who's a little bit older. It's just a lot to ask.
Yeah. Well, they will be helped by what I do expect to be one of the best four-man rushes in the NFL. I want to reiterate that very, very high on this Texans pass rush. Okay, I'm going to take a stab. You said you're not 100% sure they'll win the division. I do think this division is they're tight. It's kind of tight. Like,
Yeah, agreed.
there's some divisions where there's a clear, we did the NFC East last year. There's clear like two halves there. I don't think that's the
Hmm.
case here. I do think that, I think we all both agree the Texans are the favorite. But I,
Yes.
I, I think after that, it's a little bit tight. And in fact, I think most people would rank them in very different ways. Do you have the Jags next or the Colts next? And we'll talk about that.
Uh, I got the Colts next. I got the Colts
Okay.
next. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the Colts are funny. The Colts are gaining kind of buzz, I think, as the offseason goes on. And I think a lot of that is because people use this time of year to watch tape and catch up on players. And I think
Right.
people are watching those Anthony Richardson starts and they're getting like excited correctly about
Right.
Anthony
Right.
Richardson and his
Right.
potential because
Right.
the team is largely running it back. There's
Mhm.
a few additions on offense, notably the addition of A.D. Mitchell at wide
Mhm.
receiver.
Mhm.
But this was an offense that this is kind of shocking, I think. Finished 8th in pass DVOA last year, despite
That
having
is
what I
shocking.
frankly believe was pretty mediocre to bad, I would say inconsistent quarterback play.
Right. Right.
Have
Right.
talked a lot about Shane Steichen and why I like him so much. I think he's a really good play caller, and I think that shows that. So you did get a look at Anthony Richardson.
Right.
Uh, why are not as a Texans person, but just generally, why are you excited to watch Anthony Richardson next year? Are you high on him? Are you optimistic? Was there something you saw year one that makes you think this team is an actual threat to Houston?
Yeah. Again, I had my questions about him coming out, but I couldn't deny the talent. I just wanted to see more reps from him and see how. Because for my biggest thing when it comes to quarterbacks, when they transition from college to the NFL, is what is their processing like? Because having now covered the league for a few years, it's so clear that is a must-have. If you don't have that, it doesn't matter what else you have. It doesn't matter like how crazy your talent is. You got to be able to process. So that was one of my questions, but he was showing that, and I remember watching him week two. He was able to go through his reads
Yeah.
with ease, and obviously had some inaccurate passes here and there, but he was pretty effective in that the first half of that Texans Colts game. And again, like his legs, it's so dynamic. Like he can you can use him as the lead rusher in your running attack at times because he's so dynamic. I remember I think it might have been a third down, but they were in the red zone, and he was able to run a quarterback sweep, get into the end zone, kind of the play that got him hurt. But the fact that he has that athletic ability to even do that, it's like, wow. And again, he's not one of those quarterbacks that, yes, I can run at a high level, but he's a really effective, like he passes the eye test when it comes to being a passer. I know that, he didn't obviously have that many starts, but when there's pressure around him, he doesn't get riled per se. Like he can
Let's talk
still
about that.
go, yeah, he can still go through his reads and deliver the ball where it needs to go with the velocity that's required. Some quarterbacks want the pocket stuff to collapse. They can't generate that
Yeah.
to get the ball where it needs to go. He can do that with ease. I remember, there was a play where he's getting hit by Aaron Donald, so he would get the ball down the field. Where Jonathan Taylor talking about on podcast, where he's like, "Do you know what you just did?" And that just goes back to the talent that he has, because I'm really big on how does your quarterback handle pressure, because everybody can make throws when the pocket's clean and things like that. But how do you handle when there's pressure around you and the pocket is collapsing? And he showed flashes that he can make plays, and his play caller is Shane Steichen, and we've seen it now. Like Shane knows what he's doing. We saw what happened with Philly last year, and we saw the fact that
That's right.
the Colts got to within a fourth down play of winning
Yeah.
the AFC South. Because if Gardner Minshew throws a better pass, I think it's Goodson. If he catches that ball, I
Yeah.
had players in the locker room tell me if they get that first down, we probably lose. I had players tell me after the game. So
Yeah.
that's kind of where I'm
No,
at.
you said a lot there. So I want to make sure I don't skip over the Steichen of it all. But the thing you said about Anthony Richardson is the thing that really struck me watching. It's the thing that struck me watching him in college, which is that pressure feel. He is unbothered in the pocket, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not in a oblivious way at all. He
Right,
just is
right,
so good at managing a collapsing pocket and
right.
handling rushers and keeping his eyes downfield. Now, what happens when he then throws it is why he's not, there's a little bit of shakiness at times, because you
Right.
also saw, in the same way that you saw that pressure feel that I love so much in college, you also saw some of the inaccuracy on the short to
Mm-hmm.
intermediate stuff in particular that you
Mm-hmm.
saw in college, and that's where he has to get better. But when you watch
Right.
him, you're not like, the moment's too big, or he's rattled by the brush, or he's
Yeah.
not seeing the field. He does
Right.
all of those high level, difficult quarterback things well. It's just the accuracy that you need to see. If you really want to put him in that, upper echelon of quarterbacks, he has to be more accurate, but he's got everything else, so it's really tantalizing. And it becomes more so, I think, when you look at this receiver group, because if AD Mitchell hits his ceiling, and that's a big
Mm-hmm.
if, this
Yeah.
is suddenly a very good group, because then everybody kind of slides down into their natural role, and suddenly you've got AD as that true big body X receiver who can stretch the field. Pittman Jr. can work the intermediate part. He's so physical, working traffic, and then downs. I think he showed you he's a really good slot. And the group is really nice. I saw a quote from Anthony Richardson, AR, about AD that got me really excited. I think it was in The Athletic, where he said, he gets open a lot. He has a lot of wiggle to him. He's fast. He's a big receiver. It's like, just throw the ball to him. He's going to go get it. Man, I love hearing that if I'm a Colts fan, because that's what's been so frustrating for them the past 3 years is Alex Pierce has run endless go routes to no end. It's not having that field stretching quarterback. And if Richardson and AD can be that suddenly, combined with the QB run game and then the dominant run game with Jonathan Taylor behind an offensive line that looks like what they were a couple of years ago, that's a
Right.
scary offense.
Yeah, exactly. And to follow up on your points, right, you'll have Josh Downs, who had 771 yards last year, working underneath. So you'll have a true three guys that you can rely on who have different skill sets to where you can attack the defense in various ways, along as Anthony Richardson continues to progress as a quarterback, which there's no reason to believe that he won't. I can see him kind of being on that Josh Allen-ish arc.
Yeah.
Like, I know that's a
No,
high
those first
ceiling,
2
but
years were very,
yeah,
with
up and
Allen,
down.
very up and
Right,
down.
right. So, but he has a better receiving group to work with in his first couple years than Josh had until he got Diggs. So,
Until I got Jags, yeah.
I think I'm with you there. Like they're the team that to me is the biggest threat to the Texans, because them losing that last game for me slotted them into the third place schedule. And schedule matters so much in NFL, because I looked at the Jaguar schedule. They have a hellacious schedule because a lot of
Mm.
second place teams are really, really good. Third place teams are okay because now the Colts are gonna play like they're gonna play the Broncos who's starting a rookie quarterback, the Vikings who are also starting a rookie quarterback. Even though they have a lot of talent, but they're starting a rookie quarterback. The Giants, right? The Patriots who's starting a rookie quarterback who has very little talent around him on offense. So like you're gonna end, they get the Tennessee Titans a couple times, and they're just known. The AFC South is not a division necessarily where people like go 5-1 or 6-0. So you're gonna have some of those games where they're able to steal it from the Texans, or steal it from the Colts. I mean the Colts, but the Jags, where they're able to maybe finish with a 3-3, 4-2 record. Look at the rest of the schedule. I could see a scenario where they end up winning the division.
So if I am dubious, it's more actually, well, it would be that Richardson either gets hurt, which by the way,
Mm-hmm.
he does, you got to watch the contact. Although I think watching even the play where he got hurt, which I believe was zone read,
Mm-hmm.
it's not like he takes stupid hits and seeks out contact at all. I think
Right.
some of it was
Right.
just bad luck, but I do
Yeah.
do think you got to obviously watch that.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing though that would concern me is just the defense, particularly the pass defense.
Yeah.
There's actually some similarities to the Texans defense. I think the Texans defense is more complete and top to bottom, but it's similar in that I really, really like this Colts front.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of questions about the back end. And I have more questions about the back end than I do about Houston, which is why Houston's in my top 10 and the Colts aren't. But it's dubious. However, the front is very good. Like, what do you? Because I talked about running again. Similarly, kind of running it back. Latu Latu is the big addition. A.D. Mitchell on offense. Latu Latu, who's their first round draft pick, who I've talked about a great deal. But like, arguably, largely, this is the same defense that you saw last year.
Yeah. But last year the front was pretty good. I mean, I think they were top 5 in sack percentage, top 5 in sacks, and they led the league in 4-man rushes at like 77%. So it wasn't like they were sending extra people to try to get pressure. They were just sending 4. So I think, we have to see what the back end looks like, because again, when I was doing my research, like further, I was like, I have I got my question about the Texans secondary, but at least I'm like, hey, at least they got Stingley. At least I've seen Jimmy Ward play at a high level. Same with Jalen Petrie. It's a lot of questions where it's like I haven't even outside of Kenny Moore. Kenny Moore is a good player, but outside of him, it's like it's a lot of
Kenny
cool
Moore.
in the
There was a
secondary.
stat that made me laugh. Let me pull it. Oh yeah, they're third in DVOA versus slot receivers, 25th versus everyone else, and that's about the Colts secondary for you there. Kenny Moore is awesome.
Right. So that's kind of where the question mark is. Like, will they be able to hold up against the pass consistently? But what's going to help them, in my opinion, schedule wise, they're not facing that many great quarterbacks, so they might be able to get away with a little bit of that and be able to, I think, steal the division possibly.
Yeah. It's the case for the Colts defense being better this season. It really starts with the pass rush, which we've talked about. 5th in pass rush win. You talked about the sacks near the top of the NFL. I think they broke a franchise record for sacks, actually.
Yeah.
And it's a really cool group because it's they don't have anyone who, DeForest Buckner is probably the best player on that defensive line. Edgewise, it's like a lot of really good players. And Latu is a player I loved as a prospect. I love watching him as a pass rusher. I think he's super polished and pro ready. Even if he's just good year one, instead of immediately becoming one of the 10, 15 best edge rushers in the NFL, you still got like waves of guys outside of Stewart and Buckner on the inside.
Right.
Kwity Paye, they picked up his feeder option, was very good. Ode Ingbo showed some stuff. They moved him inside a little bit as well. Samson Ebukam is good. Like, there's just a lot of really good players, and they're so deep that Gus Bradley can keep them really fresh all game long. And I think, again, when we go back to like, what's the upside case for this group? I think some things would have to happen. Like Juju Brents, who was injured some last year, would have to hit. And it makes sense for that secondary. Blackman, who they signed, who's still a good player, would have to continue playing at a high level. I think the linebackers are solid. They're out by linebackers, but it really starts up front. Like when you're the Houston Texans are playing the Colts, that's what you're thinking about, that pass rush and whether you can stave it off. And because it's really, really good.
Yeah. Yeah, no, completely agree there. I think they had like 51 sacks, and there's no reason to think that it won't be as good next year. It isn't like they lost anybody of noteworthy or things of that nature. So yeah, no, I'm with you there. It starts with the front, and it's probably going to end with the front, right? The front can get pressure. They'll be able to potentially, limit some passing attacks. If they can't, it'll be a long day.
Jalen Jones is on track to play opposite Juju Brents. I wonder how many coaches in the NFL are like, "Oh, Jalen Johnson, he's really good," and like, he's
Yeah,
fine.
wrong
Uh,
one.
the tricky name thing. I don't know even know who's going to play safety next to Julian Blackmon. This, by the way, let me throw this out there. The Colts play a ton of cover 3. Blackmon's in the box. They don't really have like a free safety. If the Colts are serious about competing, there's some really good free safeties out there in
Mm-hmm.
free agency.
Mm-hmm.
Quandre Diggs, Justin Simmons.
Right.
They got money too. This strikes me as a team that should sign one of those guys. I know we just talked about how they like keep running it back, but I feel like that, I know Chris Ballard doesn't like to bring in outside guys that often, but they could use safety help or corner help, frankly, back there. All right, let's take a quick break, come back, and talk about those Jags. Why should you bet with Caesars Sportsbook? 2 words, Caesars Rewards. Every bet brings you closer to the types of benefits only Caesars can offer. Hotel stays, VIP experiences, sports and concert tickets, and more. It's not just an app, it's an empire. The Jacksonville Jaguars. You can make a case that they're a dark horse to rebound.
Yes.
Because they're still talented. And they absolutely imploded in the second half of last year.
They did.
Let's talk about why and whether or not they can fix it. Starting with the offense. This was, again, they went like 8-1 or something crazy to start the season. A little bit of that was smoke and mirrors, but after that, things absolutely went downhill pretty quickly. What do you think was wrong with the Jags offense watching it? Like, what was the thing that struck out to you as like, this is the number one thing they got to fix next season? Because this is a very different group, particularly at the wide receiver position. Calvin Ridley's gone. Zay Jones is gone. They draft Brian Thomas Jr. They bring in Gabe Davis. What was the biggest issue?
I think obviously Trevor got hurt.
Yes. Agree.
Because one thing that I realized when I was just rewatching a lot of their film, it's kind of like similar, but it's not the same thing. I think Trevor can navigate it better, but it's kind of like some of the issue that I think Miami has is down the stretch. They run a lot of quick game, and they're so reliant on it that once teams take it away,
Yes.
it's kind of a bleep show, right?
Yes.
And Trevor
Correct.
obviously is he's more talented than Tua, so he can navigate that better. But that's not necessarily a world you want to live in. It's funny. I was when I was rewatching it, I've watched some of Matthew Stafford, and I decided, let me just go and watch some of him, just pure drop back situations. I was like, oh, okay. I see why everybody loves him. I see it.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah.
I get it.
Anyone who has Matthew Stafford has that experience, or watches Matthew Stafford has that experience. That's why it's the number one do you watch tape test.
Yeah. And like I remember I called my dog Matthew
Oh.
Dugard. I called my dog Matthew Dugard, the athletic Seahawks reporter. And he was like, yeah, man, Matthew be slinging it. And then that just took me back to the Jaguars, like, I'm a Dolphins fan, so I watch a lot of the Dolphins. But like when you can't live in everything quick game, because once teams by the end of the year, by December, teams will figure out what you want to do, and you're gonna have like trust.
They're gonna sit on it.
Right, they're gonna sit on it, and that was a lot of the issues that the Jags receiving core faced was like DBs did not fear them vertically, and did not think they had it covered for long, so they just sat on a lot of stuff. So I think, and that had a lot had to do with the offensive line. So I think that's what the biggest issue that caused their season to go off the rails.
Totally agree. I think if this offense rebounds, the Brian Thomas Jr. and Davis signings definitely matter a great deal for
Right.
spacing, right?
Right.
Because
Absolutely.
those are deep threats, and as you said, people sat on their stuff last year. But that, to me, almost matters less than the question of, do you get a full season out of Cam Robinson, and is the Mitch Morse addition a difference maker? Because what they had last year was not tenable, and it showed up on tape.
Right.
This team could not run the ball for anything. They were atrocious, 31st in success rate running the ball.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, every metric, it's so ugly. They faced a ton of loaded boxes for sure, but they were 28th in run block win, 25th in yards before contact, 30th in football FTN's adjusted line yards metric. And the one thing, this was very, very played a big part in what made their offense non-functional at times. In short yardage situation, second or third down, dead last in the NFL. Could not get push. So that, combined with the fact that they had, one of the highest drop rates in football, I think second to the Chiefs, and the offense just felt so tight. You talked about this. The whole thing was kind of a recipe for disaster. And it's weird because, I think the quarterback's good. I think he fumbles a little too much. And no doubt last year was a bit of a step back, although injuries certainly played a role. But I think the structure of the offense was so hindered by the stuff we've been talking about. So for this to turn around, yes, the quarterback needs to play more better, but more importantly, I think the offensive line needs to play better, and the spacing needs to be better from those receivers.
Yeah, absolutely. Going to the receivers, Calvin, I don't want to say he was a little underwhelming. He might have got 1,000, but he was a little underwhelming, and it was for a lot of reasons, which is why when I started diving in more, I got even lower on the Titans. Cause I was like,
we'll get to the Titans in a second. Yeah,
right.
yeah.
I got even lower. I was like, Calvin he wasn't good against press. He faced, I believe, he was in the top 3. It was actually him and Hop. They're both in the top 4, top 5 in terms of press coverage percentage, and they both, I think Calvin had a 45% catch percentage against press coverage, and one of his biggest issues I felt was, especially specifically on third downs, he ran whether he ran a go route or stop route, he would try to always do these speed releases, but he didn't have the vertical speed that he once had, so he would end up squeezing himself to the sideline. And it made it a lot easier for DBs to cover him. Because obviously, if you're going way outside and it's hard for you to stack, as a DB, it's a lot easier for me to cover you. And I want to look at one stat, and I went to sideline targets. He had 26. I believe that was second or third in the NFL. And he only caught 6 passes in those scenarios for 63 yards, compared to Amari Cooper, who had 27 targets for 300 yards. So Amari Cooper was able to still get open enough to where those sideline targets were still effective, versus the sideline target basically a dead play. And I think that was a big problem a lot with the Jaguars in Calvin not being able to win as often as you would like. And as you said, Brian Thomas coming in, Gabe Davis, they're going to have to be effective in those scenarios, along with the offensive line being much better in those scenarios. So Trevor can have time to find a receiver, and Doug Peterson come up with a more creative third down package, because I felt like the third down packages on third down with Doug was super creative, but no,
he wasn't the play caller. It was Press Taylor.
Right.
Well, no, it's a good point and question, because Doug's sticking with Press Taylor at offensive coordinator, much to the chagrin of some Jags fans, because the offense was better when Peterson was calling it.
Right.
It's funny because I side-eyed that decision, but then again, when I was going back through it, I was like, some of this really wasn't about the play calling per se. I don't know. We'll see how that goes. Something to monitor, because I could see a situation where if this offense doesn't show some improvement, Doug might actually, take over again. I want to be clear though. I do think a lot of I know I talked about what has to happen for this offense to be better in terms of the performance of the line we've been talking about. I think ETN's a really good player. I don't think he's one of the best running backs in the league, but I think he's evasive. I think it's a really bad situation for him because I don't think he is the kind of running back who can make something out of nothing, which is what's required. He is more the kind of running back where if you drop him into a good situation, he can go nuclear. But there are a lot of good pieces. I think Evan Ingram, they figured out how to use his athleticism well. Not really as much of a blocker, but like get the ball to him in space.
Right.
I like Thomas Jr. It just, you got to have better pass protection. You got to have better run blocking. So we'll see. We'll see how that goes. Yeah, the defense is interesting because they also kind of fell off. They ended up finishing pretty high in a lot of metrics, 10th versus the pass, 12th versus the run. A lot of that was because of their performance in the first half of the season, DJ. Things kind of, there were some really bad performances against the run down the stretch. There were some injuries, I think, that played a pretty big role in that. But up front, actually, let me go over some of the changes here because this actually, there's a lot of changes on this side of the ball too. Starting with the defensive coordinator, Ryan Nielsen comes in from the Atlanta Falcons, previously the Saints. So up front, you alluded to this, you add Eric Armstead from San Francisco to a defensive line that did play quite well last year. Josh Hines-Allen rewarded with a big contract. Trevon Walker, I thought, played a lot better than he did his rookie season. Linebacker group is the same. Secondary, a lot of changes. Darius Williams is out. Ronald Darby's in at corner. Darnell Savage is in at nickel. It's gonna be interesting. So yeah, do you think that this group has the potential to be one of the better defenses in the NFL? Is the pass rush scary you? How do you think they stack up against the division?
I think the front is really good, right? Like
Front is good.
You got Josh, you got Armstead, you got Trevon Walker. Like that's a pretty good front. Just that secondary is going to be such a question. And again, the DC
the
coming
theme
from
in this division, by the way. Even when we get to the Titans, I'm going to say
I
something
know,
pretty
right?
similar. Yeah, it is the theme.
But I like their DC mainly because he had the Falcons playing some really, really good football on the defensive side, right? They were a top 10 third down defense. Like that's one of my biggest things is how are you on third downs? Because a lot of football, NFL is situational, right? How are you in the red zone? How are you on third downs? How are you goal line? Things of that nature. And they were really good. I mean, they were really good on third downs. And I think the fact that talking about the Falcons defense, that is, the fact that they were fourth in sacks as a team that doesn't necessarily have a premier pass rusher is in fifth in sack percentage. I'm all right. Maybe he can bring over whatever scheme, whatever brains that he had there, bring that over to the Jaguars. The only thing though, he lived in a lot of man coverage on third downs. Do they have the guys capable?
That was one of my questions. Yeah, thinking about his scheme.
Right. Do they have the guys capable of playing man coverage on third down? Because last year, I'm just looking at some of my notes. I remember that they had the Jags defense played man on 20% of dropbacks, and quarterbacks tore them up with a passer rating of 116, second most, with a touchdown to interception ratio of 16-3. And you only played man coverage 20% of your dropbacks, and you were getting tore up like that. So that lets me know, like, they might not have, we're going to see how he adapts his team to his guys, the guys that he has now. But I like him as a defensive mind.
I think he will change it up because, to your point, he's probably going to have to on the back end. I will say, the Jags secondary, there's talent there. Like Tyson Campbell has played at a high level. Andre Cisco is a good safety. I just think there's holes. And we'll see what you get out of Antonio Johnson year 2. I have question marks on the back end. On the front, I actually really like what he can do for this front, which is already quite good. But I think about Ryan Nielsen going back to the Saints days, 4-3. He wants his defensive linemen to single gap, to attack. He really likes this is the Saints thing, big edge rushers. sounds like a good formula for Travon Walker to me,
Mm-hmm.
who has some versatility from an alignment perspective. So does Armstead. I think that this pass rush could hit another level potentially. Year 3 with Devin Lloyd, who played better, still not great in coverage, but I think this linebacker group is decent. So while I have question marks about the back end, and I do think there's holes in the secondary, I am pretty optimistic about this pass rush, and I do like the defensive coordinator a lot. And, if the offense takes a leap, they might actually be in positions where they can just get after the quarterback a lot. So I guess all told, DJ, to kind of wrap up the Jags, like the more you think about it, it wouldn't surprise me. This team had such bad vibes last year, and the second half of the season was so awful, and it was such a
Right.
meltdown that's
Right.
kind of hung over this,
Mm-hmm.
off season. But as we're talking and talking about the changes they've made, and the coaching change, and some of the additions, it wouldn't surprise me if they bounce back and
Yeah. No.
are right in the thick of it with the division.
Yeah. It wouldn't surprise me at all. My only thing is, that offensive line, it has to get to an adequate level or even above adequate level because their schedule this
Yeah.
year, they're gonna play like their first 4 games is at Miami versus the Cleveland Browns, at Buffalo, at Houston, and then versus the
Mm,
Colts. Like
yeah.
we could look up and it could be 2-3, 1-4 to start the year. We could look up and that could be the case if their offensive line doesn't kind of get their act together. And that's not even mentioning that they got to play at Philly, who the D line should be better in 2024. They got to play Detroit at Detroit. And second, they got to play versus the Jets. The Jets have they probably got arguably the best D line in the entire NFL, especially if they can get Hassan Reddick on board. And there's some good D lines in the AFC South. So my trepidation is going to center on the offensive line and can the receivers help out Trevor more in 2024?
Agree completely. Um, Similar questions in some ways about the Tennessee Titans, particularly the offensive line aspect. Now, the one thing I'll say this about the Titans, they're trying, man. This
They
team did
are.
not stand pat. They're kind of the Colts. It's like, okay, we're betting. It's always with the Colts, right? They're betting on their guys. The Titans said, no, no, no. We are going to invest in free agency. We've got a lot of money. We want things to be better around Will Levis, which feels like a good place to start, which is the Levis aspect of this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Ups and downs last year. I think that the biggest question one might have is how much of the downs, the struggles at times, and he had some pretty good performances, some big time throws. Obviously, first game, the game against Miami. How much of it was the offensive line being non-functional? How much of it was him not playing well under pressure or not having a good feel for it? Do you feel like we even know the answer to that question?
Right. Yeah. I don't know. Right. Because I remember like watching both games against the Texans in person. He looked like a pinata back there. You
Yeah.
know. And then I go, recently I was doing my research and I look at the Titans pass block win rate. They were 11th. So I'm like, all right, it's got to be a
That,
combination of the two. Yeah, and I'm like, there's no way it could have been that good because I'm like, ain't
yeah, I'm
no
a little
quarterback
dubious.
ain't no way a quarterback getting beat up like that, and you got the 11th best pass block offensive line. But yeah, for me, it's more about okay, how a lot of their season rides on like how good can Will Levis be, um, because some of these other teams that we talk about AFC South, like their rosters around them are good enough to where if they're not playing like A+ football or even like B+, if they're playing like B, they can contend for the division. Where like the Titans, I feel like where the way their roster's at right now, they kind of need like we'll have to make like a big, big, big jump. And one metric I always like to look at is how do you play on third downs? And he had a QBR, I believe, of 15, which is not good. But to be fair, on third downs,
I'm
you
sure he was
know,
pressured like
right,
45% of the time or
right,
something
right.
crazy. Yeah.
But when he was pressured, the QBR went down to 8. But
It was not.
again, to be fair,
Well,
like the majority of quarterbacks under pressure on third downs had bad QBRs.
Yeah, well, this was kind of the wrap on him coming into the NFL. It was kind of questions about play under pressure, and he landed in a very, I don't care what pass block win rate says. That was
Yeah,
not
same.
that's not like, this is pretty atrocious. Ryan Tannehill actually had a higher pressure rate than him behind that offensive line, and when Will Levis, even when he got out the ball out fairly quickly, he was still facing a lot of pressure. As I
Hmm.
mentioned, they did invest, in fixing that, not only drafting J.C. Latham out of Alabama to play left tackle, hopefully get better play out of Peter Skoronski next to him, and then Lloyd Cushenberry is a good center. The big investment that, everyone talks about for a reason is Bill Callahan coming over
Right. Right.
with Brian Callahan, the offensive line coach. The best in the NFL, maybe outside of Philly.
Hmm.
I went on my friend Greg Rosenthal's podcast, and I was joking about how there's certain offensive line coaches we're all just like, they're really good, even though we don't know what the hell we're talking about. Like Mike Munchak, that man knows what he's doing. But I will say this about Bill Callahan, man. That
Yeah.
Browns offensive line was down to like their backup tackles
Yep.
last year, and they were still playing pretty damn well. So
Hmm.
that says something to me. And some of those prospects were pretty raw out there. So one would think that would help. One also imagines playing with this group of skill players will help, because I do think they're quite good. You can raise questions about the build, like what the roster construction side of it,
Hmm.
because they're very old.
Right.
But as far as the team that they are fielding this season, Hopkins, Ridley, Boyd, Burks, and Westbrook-Ikine behind them, that's a good group. And it's a group that fits well together. You talked about
Yeah. Yeah.
Calvin
Yeah.
Ridley
For
and some
sure.
of his struggles last year, DJ. And I think watching him, I thought was like, Calvin Ridley's really not a one. But
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
next to
Yeah. Yeah.
DeAndre Hopkins, makes a little more sense.
Right. Right. And I remember like watching some more of Hop. I'm like, okay, nah, he still has one. He's still like one ish. Like he can still be like,
He's good still.
yeah, he's still like really good. So I'm like, all right, if you slot Calvin into your two slot, and then you have Boyd at your three, and who's used to being a three. Now that's gonna elevate Will Levis. 'Cause I think right now at Will Levis's point of his career, he needs elevation, which is fine. Like like some quarterbacks, there's only a few that can just elevate everybody around them. Not everybody can be Mahomes, not everybody can be Josh Allen, not everybody can be Lamar. But the fact that they've given him the talent that he needs to be effective, we're gonna find out very fast, is Will Levis the guy or not? We're going to be able to find that out by the end of the year. And, credit to the Titans general manager for putting those pieces around him to where we'll be able to find that answer pretty quickly. But, I still got questions about, the defense.
Let's get to the defense. They made some changes here as well, notably it's funny because I contrasted them with the Colts. The Colts were rumored to be interested in signing L'Jarius Sneed. They did not.
Mm-hmm.
Surprise, surprise. I feel like the Colts are always like, they're going to do it, and then they never do.
Yeah, I know, right?
Uh, it's like it used to be the Celtics for years like that. But then they started actually doing stuff. The Titans are not afraid to make moves. They did go out and they signed L'Jarius Sneed. You bring in a few other players. So up front, you got Jeff Simmons. They drafted Devondre Sweat at nose. You bring in Sebastian Joseph Day, competent veteran.
Mm-hmm.
Rushing the passer, Harold Landry, who came back from injury and played very well. Arden Key was a good player. And then, Snead at corner opposite Chidobe Awuzie was the other corner they brought in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the players I just mentioned are pretty good. Where I start to get concerned is like the middle.
Mm-hmm.
Linebacker group, I have questions. Safety, questions. I do like McCreary. I think they figured out at the nickel
Right.
is pretty good. But
Right.
this was a defense last year that was very good against the run, very good against the pass. When I look at them, kind of feel like we might get a similar result. Yeah, I mean, even with the Snead addition, which is good, I just feel like if I was an offensive coordinator, there's just such clear area. Like I'd be like, yeah, don't throw it L'Jarius Snead, cool.
Yeah,
But
yeah, 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 yeah.
there's just so many other areas in the secondary and the linebacker group in particular that I would want to attack.
Yeah, absolutely. Like again, like as you mentioned, right? Like Snead was phenomenal last year. He
Really
had
good.
he had a tight winner percentage of 31, which is really really good. It was really up there. Obviously, like he loves to live in press coverage, but that's just one guy, right? If there's questions across, especially the middle of the defense where teams in today's NFL love to throw, that's gonna give you some issues,
Yeah.
especially in the AFC South where you got
I was gonna
like
say, like,
teams.
the Houston Texans,
Hey,
the
come on, they love throwing in the middle of
yeah,
the field, so that's gonna for sure give them trouble throughout the year. But I think we could see a scenario where like they're one of those scrappy defenses that are really good in situation, like third down, red zone.
3rd in the
Where they
red
can
zone
keep,
last year in
yeah,
DVOA. They
they were
yeah.
excellent in the red zone last year, like phenomenal. I remember like there were games where like it looked like, especially the first game CJ came back against the Titans, it looked like they were gonna just run away with it, and it did get to that point. However, uh, they kept them out of the end zone a fair amount of times, which kept the game kind of close. Where it's like, you just scored a touchdown, you're right back in it. But obviously the offense struggled a lot, and Evans got hurt in that first game back for CJ. But I think the defense could still be pretty effective. It just don't feel like they have enough. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
outside of
Some
Jeffrey
players away.
Simmons, yeah, exactly. Outside of Jeffrey Simmons, Snead. How many difference makers do they really have? I like Landry because obviously after missing the whole year with ACL, I think 2022 he had 10 sacks in 2023.
Yeah.
But like with defense, a lot of it is the best defenses we see in the league. They usually have a bunch of dudes, and this defense is kind of missing some of those difference makers. So
Yeah.
I think.
I
Go
think
ahead.
it's they outside of Simmons, they just haven't drafted well, and
Hmm.
there's been a lot of missteps, particularly in the secondary, and it's kind of coming home to roost. So you're having to pay for cornerback help, and again, I think Snead's a really good player. We'll see if he can play as level he did last year. But again, McCreary, good hookers, getting up there. He's playing for a while, but they're just holes. I think the other thing I should mention as we wrap is it's a new defensive coordinator, Denard Wilson, who
Hmm.
was with the Ravens last year, but I actually would caution against assuming this is going to be like the Ravens defense because
Right.
um, I've been kind of reading his quotes about it, just trying to get a sense of like what to expect. And
Yeah.
he has mentioned attacking, aggression. Todd Bowles is a mentor of his. Greg Williams, which
Right.
sounds much more like he's gonna blitz, he's gonna
Yeah.
press. We'll see how that works out for them.
Right.
I do think it makes some sense in that team is probably stronger at pass rush and corner than like up the spine the way the Ravens are. But
Right.
yeah, it's I think like for them to hit, not only would you need the 3 players we mentioned to be Simmons, Landry, Snead to be stars, you would need like a surprise, like whether it's like
Hmm.
Cedric Gray, the rookie linebacker, or Devondre Strutt, who's at those, or I don't know, whoever's playing safety. This is another team that could probably sign a safety. There's all these safety
Right.
free agents. I'm
I
like,
know.
why? Anyways, some other player is gonna have to step up because otherwise, I just feel like there's a lot of holes.
Yeah, nah, there. I know we said the Colts could use one of those safeties. The Titans could really use. I mean, I still don't understand why Justin Simmons is still available. I wonder what it is. Like he was really good last year, really good the year before. He's been a really, really good player. They could use him because, as you said, like safety is kind of a question mark, and as you said, like right down the spine, the middle of the defense, it's just and that's probably what's going to hold them back this year is the fact that they don't necessarily have that many difference makers. Because again, like when we look at some of the other teams that we really like across the league, like even within the division, like we can point to people that are like true, like enough guys where it's like, hey, we know he's gonna be able to make a difference. We can count on that week in, week out, things of that nature. So Titans just don't have enough of those guys, specifically on defense.
So it sounds to me like you are going Texans, Colts, Jags, Titans. You were
So
very high in the Titans last year. Do you remember
I
that?
was, I do remember that. I do remember that. I was very high on, I was high on Mike Vrabel. You know, he just his old line was just bad. So I think man, I think I haven't done my research. I think the Colts end up winning the division. One of my
What?
biggest things, yeah, one of my biggest things is the Texans schedule scares me. It scares me. It scares me. The Texans schedule,
DJ.
yeah, it scares me. Like
Wow. Let
that's
it
a
not
tough
be said that
schedule.
you were biased.
Yeah,
Because that
like
is
that's a
what a
tough
shocking
schedule.
pick.
Yeah, I think the Colts end up winning because like I like the schedule. I like the pieces that they have. I think AR is going to take, like, if he stays healthy, he's going to take, a massive. But I still think the Texans make the playoffs. I think get one of the wild card spots. But they have to play the Bills, the Lions, the Dolphins, the Chiefs, the Ravens. Like that 3-game stretch at the end of the year where they go Miami at home, Chiefs, Ravens, in like a 12-day span. Like, and they got to play at New York on a short week. Obviously, they're not going to sweep through the entire division, so they're going to probably go like 4-2 within the division, and like that might be just enough. I think they got to play the Cowboys. That just might be enough to knock them off from repeating. So that's kind of where I'm at, right? Where it's like
I will do you a solid and not clip that one off. But I will also boldly say that I expect the Texans to win. But I do think the Colts are going to threaten the playoffs. I think them and the Jags, though, are pretty neck and neck. We'll see about these Titans. I think the Titans, even if you don't make the playoffs, if Will Levis looks like the dude, that's a successful season for you. DJ Bien-Aime, not biased at all. I am actually really shocked and impressed, honestly, because I think with beat reporters, sometimes there's always the expectation that you're just going to stand your team, but that was not the case here. I'm excited to revisit this potentially in a
me
year.
too.
With Texans, they're supposed to play week 1, right? If I remember correctly.
Yep, they go on the road to
Okay.
play the Colts, so
If the
we'll see.
Texans absolutely slap them down, you will never live this down. But no, this is really fun. Thank you so much for joining me. You can find DJ. He covers the Texans for us, obviously. You can also find him on Twitter. You're just DJ Bien-Aime, right?
Yep,
Bienamie for those who know.
AIME, but yeah, that's about it.
AIME.
Yep.
And you can check this podcast out wherever you get your podcast ad-free on Amazon Music or on YouTube at youtube.com/@MinaKimes. Smash that subscribe button. We are going to be back next week with, we're doing a couple more Power Rankings episodes next week. Spoiler alert, turning the tables, and I will be doing the ranking instead of hosting, so you guys can see what I actually think. And then we're going to cover the NFC South, which is going to be a ton of fun. Thank you, as always, to the fine folks at Omaha Productions who help me make this podcast every week. Kirsten Subecki, Owen Saylor, Anthony Jimenez, Jack Foster. You guys are great. And I'll talk to you guys next week.